You can't do a whole episode about found enough freak out about eternity. We have to. It's too late. They're already doing the thing. Hey guys, welcome to News from Heaven. Today the show is about how to not freak out about eternity. Isn't that good? Well, this is actually something that I've had people talk to me about, saying that the concept of eternal life bothers them in some way. And we talk a lot about the eternal life is a pretty dramatic way to say it, but the survival of consciousness, the perpetual existence. How can we think about that? How can we wrap our heads around that in a way that sticks? But I would say that it's always about more than the topic. Because if you think about, so let's say somebody's got a cloud in their mind, and some people can get paralyzed by this. Never underestimate how terrifying a concept can be. Because if it's presented to you in the right way, anything can be. So somebody's saying, I don't know how to deal with this idea that you live forever. And this could be that, aren't we going to get bored? Aren't things going to get stagnating? Or that makes me feel claustrophobic to think about that, right? But as soon as we start learning about anything about the truth, right, or how we're asserting that life actually is, it just can't help but start to address these other areas in life, or that's what I find as well. So in digging into what's going on with this, we dig into what's going on with all of us all the time. Please like and subscribe, and then if you want to follow along, you can download Heaven and Hell for free in a link in the description. We're going to go to number 167, because I was cruising through the time section. There's a section in there about time in the spiritual world, and this popped out to me as this is a cool way to think about it. Since angels have no notion of time, they have a different concept of eternity than we earthly people do. By eternity, angels perceive an infinite state, not an infinite time. Okay, come on, let's get our money's worth out of the highlighters here, because here we've got eternity, what the show is about. Here we have a very bizarre statement where it seems like you'd think angels are just like us in an evolved, upgraded form. An angel is going to be, if you're in some kind of class with an angel, they're always going to have their hand up because they're going to have more mental stuff going on than you. But here they don't. We all have a notion of time, but they don't have one. And by eternity, angels perceive an infinite state, not an infinite time. An infinite state. What is an infinite state? This is going to be key. But also this angels having no notion of time. We're going to visit that as well in shocking fashion. And this all came into Swedenborg's consciousness because he was pondering the same things that we could ponder. What do you mean forever? And this is, you don't just have to be talking about eternal time and living forever. Just anything that's forever is freaky. I mean, you just watch a show about outer space. It's bad enough how far away the moon is from the Earth and the sun is from the Earth and how far across the galaxy is. That's bad enough, but don't start telling me that it's I don't even remember the figure, but many light years to the nearest galaxy, and light year is how far light can travel in a year, which I believe light gets to our planet in like 7 minutes from the sun, which is something like a gazillion miles away from us. A light year, and the closest galaxy, and that's just one other galaxy, and there's billions of these, and then space goes on forever, we think, or it's expanding, but what's it expanding into? Don't talk to me about that. That's freaky. Let alone an infinity of time. And Swedenborg was having this same kind of stoner moment. That's just what you call it. Doesn't mean he's on anything. But thinking about eternity. I was thinking about eternity once, using a concept of time. Oh, and this is a cool distinction here. So he's good on one thing. Using a concept of time, I could grasp what to eternity entailed, namely without end. Okay, I can get it. This thing is here, and it's always going to be here. You go check it out. You wait 1,000 years. You wait 1,000,000 years. You wait 1,000,000,000 years. It's still there. It's hanging out. Oh, I should be. All right, this is a show about drawing things. So let's say you had a shape, and this shape was just going to sit on this hill forever. And civilizations would always come and check on it. Yep, it would always be there, and you could just know, doesn't matter how much the rest of the world changed around it, this thing is always going to be here. Okay, I get it. And you'd probably, rather than a particular object shape, you'd be thinking about reality. It's always going to be here. You can always check it. I got it, without end. But not what from eternity. entailed. And therefore, not what God did before creation from eternity. Okay, now that's starting to get a little freaky. Because if we have like our timeline of existence right above the annotations, if you're talking about infinity, it's got to go infinity in both directions. So we can get, if we say we're here, we can get what the future is. But what about going back forever? And particularly if we're asserting that creation, if you have God who's eternal, but not the rest of this stuff, human beings haven't been around forever. The world, let's say there was some kind of event here, which was creation, and God is across this whole thing. What's God doing here? What's God doing in this space when there's no creation? We think about what God is doing now, which is hopefully helping people out, managing life, looking into our hearts and trying to pull us towards what's good and true, being the force behind the mechanisms of the world and all that God sort of stuff. When there was no stuff to manage, what was God doing? And we think, oh, this is just a little spot, but realize this goes on forever backwards. Okay, I'm getting freaked out. This goes on forever backwards. So God was had an infinite amount, even right now, trying to think about it. But wait, what was he doing before that? Before that was just sitting around being God, and there was no beginning. He just always was. Okay, wow, I didn't really realize this till I'm talking about it now. That's a problem. What is that? Like, was just sitting there forever? Like, how did he even get to this point? Yikes. So, what are we going to do to resolve this conundrum? And it's really, that question ties in as well to what are we going to be doing? Like, in the future, if you think about this always going forward, are we just going to be are we going to run out of activities? Are we going to know how to play all the instruments in the world? How are we going to tie into that? But God was doing from eternity. As my anxiety mounted because of this, so this is existential fear on Swedenborg's part. This is really bothering him. Like, wait a second. God was forever. Just think about it. Do you get the sense of like vertigo? Back in the past, because of this, I was raised. So what's the antidote? He's got this anxiety. What's going to happen to fix him? I was raised into the sphere of heaven, and therefore into the perception of eternity shared by angels. So to get where he needed to go, to get this fix we're talking about, or how do we mitigate some kind of eternity-style fear, this particular one may not be yours, he had to actually have his mind raised up to get some experiential learning, rather than just somebody talks to him about it. But he does bring back tangible concepts for us. Into the perception of eternity shared by angels. This shed light for me on the fact, and this is a pretty load-bearing sentence here, that we ought not to think about eternity in temporal terms, but in terms of state. And that when we do, we can grasp what from eternity entails, which was actually done for me. I mean, that's a lot of what he says about it. So part of it is just, look, you've got to experience it. But he does leave these clues for us. Think in terms of state rather than in terms of time. These little, and we're about to launch into just how much time, the idea of time, is tied to the physical experience. So these little hash marks are to let you know how many years are in between this. 1 billion years, 1 million years, 2 years. But that in the spiritual world, it's not time. But it's not nothing. It's state. So whatever state is, somehow state is interacting here. Okay. So what does that mean? The angels who talk with us never use the natural concepts that are proper to us. So angels do talk to us, but they don't talk in the same concepts that we often think of, all of which derive from time, space, matter, and the like. They use spiritual concepts, all of which derive from states and their various changes in and around angels. However, when the angelic concepts which are spiritual flow into us, they changed instantly and spontaneously into those natural concepts proper to us that exactly correspond to the spiritual ones. Neither the angels nor we are aware of this, but still this is how all inflow of heaven occurs for us. It's like you see the people who are in the United Nations and they're listening to somebody talking over here and they have a headset on, this big old headset where somebody is translating that. And so they actually get the translation rather than what this person is saying here. We have natural concepts in our minds. Angels don't think in terms of space and time, and you're going to see how profound that is coming up. But when they talk about spiritual things, those things are UN-style translated into things we can understand. So an angel can talk. Swedenborg makes a big point about how, and I'll try to give you something tangible about this. Think about days and nights and evenings and mornings and the cycle. That here, and he'll be saying this in a minute, but I'll try to break it out a little bit here. Here we have those parts of the day which are dictated by the rotation of the earth and the position of the sun. And because matter has this property to it, it's just a regular interval that you can measure, and we can say this is always how long an hour is, and physical things can keep track of that precisely because they are in this time-based state. But don't we think of the way we use those times a day, morning, noon, evening, night, to talk about states of being? If it's like, it's a dark night of the soul, okay? It doesn't matter what time it is outside. We know that it's this thing that is like night, but it's inside of us. If there's a new beginning, we talk about morning inside of us, okay? We talk about the brightness in the mind. There are states that correspond. It doesn't mean, I'm in a dark night of the soul. Oh, okay, I'm going to have to wait 12 hours till it's morning. We know that it's independent of time, but it is something that does correspond. And this allows angels to communicate with us. This is how correspondences works. Everything we see here and go through is a representation of spiritual things. The difference is spiritual things don't have space and time attached. There were some angels who were let very intimately into my thoughts, into Swedenborg's thoughts, all the way into natural ones that contained a mass of material from time and space. So because we just have to think, we navigate time and space physically, you have to have those attached to the thoughts. But look what it does to angelic company there. However, since at that point they could not understand anything at all, they promptly withdrew. And after they had withdrawn, I heard them talking, saying they had been in darkness. This is Swedenborg's mind, right? Isn't Swedenborg pretty plugged in? He's got some cool ideas. This is also getting into this idea that angels don't have a sense of time, that there is some things that they have moved beyond. Ostensibly, all angels were people once and had those then, but the natural memory becomes dormant. They actually can't see into our minds just like we can't see into their minds. This is a translation program both ways. And here's where we get to this whole treatise about the days and times that I was going on. This is a conversation between Swedenborg and a particular angel. I've been allowed to know from experience what angels' ignorance of time is like. There was a particular individual from heaven whose nature did allow him to be let into natural concepts, such as we have, which this right here is cool, because we talk about the importance of heaven is this place where there are all kinds of different people. Everybody is unique. The mindsets people have based on their experiences and what they love are unique. And this is important because you have different angels that are both great in different ways doing different functions. You have some angels who are so spiritual and celestial that they are just up above and they think so angelically. They're way up here. But this angel that we're talking about has got some kind of natural component in the mind, which might think, oh, they're not quite as evolved because there's some, I'm just showing a mesh of green and yellow. There's some natural stuff because of the nature of this person, but this person then is allowed to perform a role that these angels can't do. Allow him to be let into natural concepts such as we have. So this person can be a bridge. There is an imperative for diverse mindsets. There have to be those. This is why there's so many different kinds of people. This is why we all have such different lives, because ultimately we can perform these functions. I talked with him afterwards, person to person. And at first he did not know what it was that I was calling time. So this angel is talking with Swedenborg, and we'll draw Swedenborg here. We got to have a wig, right? Mm-hmm. And the angel is basically smiling and nodding because Swedenborg's talking about time. And the angel's like, what do you say? He say, rhyme, lime, what is that, time? So I actually had to tell him how the sun seems to travel around our earth and make years and days, and that as a result, years are divided into 4 seasons and into months and weeks and days into 24 hours, and that these times recur at fixed intervals. This gives rise to our expressions for time. He was astonished when he heard this and said that he had not known that kind of thing, but only what states were. Again, this guy had some life, or girl had some life. It says he. So this guy had some life where he knew this, but the natural memory goes dormant, not entirely because this person has this particular interface symbolized by the green there, but had to be re-educated on this. Or maybe this is somebody who died as a small child, who didn't really ever get a sense of time. You know, kids don't live in time and space the way we do, that they can get so absorbed in anything. When you're saying, okay, in 5 minutes we need to pack up because we're leaving, to them, there's this eternity stretching before them where I'm going to start a game, we're playing here. There's no sense of the impending future like we adults are blessed with. In the course of our conversation, I mentioned that it was known in our world that there's no time in heaven. We do actually talk as though we knew. Since when people die, we say they have left temporal things and have passed beyond time, meaning they have left our world. Do people still say that? They did in his day. I also said that it's known by some that times are states in origin. And here's something where these two actually do really start to become distinct. And remember before, when I was talking about how there's a physical world and there's revolutions of the sun, and you can keep track of time by something like an atomic clock very precisely because physical things are in that. This is where you see the difference between our consciousness being a spiritual thing and an atomic clock being a physical thing. I said that it is known by some that times are states in origin because they recognize that times are experienced in precise accord with the states of affection we are caught up in. They are short for us when we are engaged in pleasant and cheerful pursuits, and long when we are engaged in distasteful and depressing ones. Right? Nobody can deny that things feel shorter or longer, but can feel incredibly shorter or longer. I'll just reuse those words based on what our affection is for them, and variable when we are in hope or expectation. Sometimes when you're hoping, it drags things out. Sometimes it condenses things. And look at this last sentence. As a result, scholars are asking what time and space are. And some of them even recognize that time is an attribute of the natural person. I was listening a couple hundred years after this to Stephen Hawking's A Briefer History of Time. Yeah, it's like the dumbed down version of A Brief History of Time, but look who's listening to it so you can understand. And he was saying that that's really, and that's a few years ago, maybe the science has moved on, maybe I'm embarrassing myself, but I'm not embarrassing myself if I never know that I was wrong, that people are really starting to look at time, maybe even space, as a property of physical stuff. That it's not an intrinsic thing to reality. It's part of the physical universe. That you can go outside time and space somehow. So that there was inklings of that back then, and this could really be supported. That okay, there's a reality outside. We're in time and space, and we try to think from our little time and space about eternity. An eternity of us living, and that is an eternity beforehand of God existing. And it's strange, it's bizarre. It can give us these bothersome extra clouds in the mind. But is that because we're thinking from an artificial corner of reality about the actual reality outside it is independent of time and space? And what would that mean? How does this apply to our God thing? This is what I think, so you can know to discount this. But if you think about states being independent of time, rather than, okay, then it goes back further. There was a state of, the God was in some kind of mindset before creation, was in some kind of state of, look, this is what I'm going to do. without any time, then there was the state of creation, then there'll be the next state. That's it. Do you get what I'm talking about? Does that resonate? Does that make sense? To me, it does flick a little switch, that there's preparation regardless of time, there is intention, there is act, there continues to be acts, that there's a progression of states that always are. And maybe in God, Swedenborg does talk about God being in all time independent of time. So that God, everything past and future is the present. So that God is somehow hovering. I bet you can make a very cool graphic about this. Okay, I'll make it here on the screen. Just kidding. I don't have the artistic ability to do it. You're hovering over all time as now. So God is in that state. And that for us, if we're thinking about an eternity of life, to think about that in terms of time and the revolutions of the years and how it can be a grind on earth to live through even 1 year. Yeah, that's weird. That could be claustrophobic. But if you think about the states that you're in, the state of joy, the state of anticipation, the state of learning, the state of growing, and the cycling through those like a kid does. A kid, if you told a little 3-year-old you're going to live forever, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. And they would not be bothered by it. They would just be like, what's the next thing we're doing? This is fun. And if you think about heaven as an eternity, not of time, but of joyful states, one to the next, when you're in joyful states, you don't even, the idea of being worried about the longevity, you're not even thinking like that. You're just absorbed in the present moment. That's what eternity is. That's what we can get to, where it's like, this is fun and I can do this thing, let's go do that. And then we can do this. That's more of what the eternity we'd experience is. And so those are a couple of thoughts that semi resolve the issue of eternity. And that's about par for the course on this show. That's the news from heaven. Thanks guys so much for doing it. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. What do you think? Is this pull some cool insight in that you can use in your life? How is it learning about how to not freak out about eternity? Is there some shade on it that I didn't get? We just love to hear from you. We want to process this, see if we can't make it into the right mental apparatus that allows us to move through life happily and joyfully. I've been in a good state as this episode goes by. I hope same for you. Let's do it again sometime in the future of time. Okay. I better quit while I'm behind. See ya.